and today our guest is Jeff Swanson. Jeff is running for state representative in District 51 in Alamogordo. He joined the United States Marine Corps at age 17 and served in Vietnam in 1969 and 70. He went to seminary and was ordained a Lutheran pastor, and then served 26 more years on active duty in the United States Air Force as a chaplain. His last overseas tour was the Drama Hospital in Iraq during the surge. Jeff is married to Donna, and she is active in state and local politics as well. Jeff also serves on the state budget and finance team and is the vice chair of the Otero County Democratic Party. The Swansons have a small acreage where they raise saddle mules and a few cattle. Jeff is running for office because he believes that we should invest our wealth and resources into our people so that we have security, education, healthcare, and infrastructure. These endeavors create opportunities to provide a thriving society for everyone. Everyone believes Democrats have the best chance to create a thriving society. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Madeline.
So this is exciting to have you here with me today, because one of my favorite places was going down there to Alamogordo in Otero County and just seeing the military presence there and veterans, and I just know that you are going to do really well down there. So what I want to do first is ask you about our education system. And that's a really important topic because you know that's going to help in developing an economy for us. So can I ask you, what are your plans for education down there? And not just in Alamogordo, but across the state.
We need to plow in as citizens, as legislators, and we need to figure out a plan for New Mexico education. As I attend some of the events here and I dialogue with the students and the teachers and the parents, I sense a tremendous embarrassment that New Mexico scores near the last or at the last in many surveys and ratings across the United States. I personally was greatly embarrassed recently by the Martinez administration when we had a decrease in oil prices per barrel, and that caused some stress on the state budget. So what happened was our governor and various officials, and even some Democrats, got into a huge public argument over media, over social media, newspapers, television, and embarrassed our state because we were talking about what we were going to do to cut funds for education and cut resources in this big budget crisis. Well, I believe that we're smart enough to figure out how to manage our budget, even in a time when we have decreased oil prices per barrel, so that we don't go through a big crisis like that. And, you know, beyond the embarrassment to me as an adult or to the other adults or the Martinez administration, I think that the bottom line is the student. What harm did we cause to the students by creating this huge mess, this huge crisis in education? So I'd like to get in the state legislature, and I'd like to work. One of the options that I would like us to explore is developing a second fund rather than that big permanent fund, because getting money out of that is going to be very difficult, but have a second fund, and that fund would be much more fluid. We would maybe earmark some money or some portions of the resources for education in lean times, and also the state employees pension fund. That's another huge embarrassment. So I think that there are plans that we could make, and there are budget tweaks that we could make to avoid a big crisis when the oil prices per barrel fall. Now, why are the oil prices up right now? And we have a $200 million, influx of wealth into our state budget. Has nothing to do with us. I'll tell you what it has to do with. It has to do with a bunch of Iraqi warlords sitting around and making a decision that they would quit killing each other and they would start pumping oil. And when they made that decision about a year and a half ago, what happened is Saudi Arabia and other nations realized that they were going to have a decrease in their oil prices with the influx of more oil in the worldwide economy. So they made steps to alter their oil supply, and that caused us to have an increase per barrel oil price. We don't control the global markets of oil production, only a small little tiny portion here in New Mexico. So just sitting here at the mercy or the whims of situations that we cannot control seems absolutely nuts to me. There's another thing that we need to do. Miss Gandera, okay, from out of state, not an educator. I mean, we hired somebody to run our education system who really was not up to the job. Whoever we put in our PED really needs to know what they're doing. They need to have a heart and a mind focused on education and the kids of New Mexico and be able to work with our local school boards and others that are actually running the school system. So, we need some plans. Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese warrior, says to us that the one with the best plans is going to prevail in contention every single time. What's our plan in New Mexico? And we didn't have one in the last administration. We've got to have better plans. So I'm going to get in there in the state legislature if I get elected, and I'm going to work with the budget officials. I'm going to work with our educators. I'm going to work with education officials. And I'm really going to work hard so that we have plans to not let New Mexico education systems fail.
Right.
That's just a start. I got a lot more to say, but that's just a start.
Right. Well, it sounds like you have some good plans for going. I'm also looking at when you're talking about the way that this governor has brought someone in from out of state to run our education system, and how that person just really didn't have any sense of what our state was and is. And that's the important part about having people like you who really do understand the state, having something to say in what we're doing with our money. And I think that so much of that is contingent on the knowledge of our own representatives. And so when we're looking at, pardon me?
I've taken nearly 20 college courses in education. 9 of them were in special ed, and I've done 3 teaching practicums. I'm convinced that we're not using our teachers and our resources in a wise and efficient way. There are plans and tweaks that we can do to our education system to dig ourselves out of this mess.
Right.
And here's another thing. I looked into one of the rating systems that rated New Mexico dead last. Okay, and I saw a list of criteria like student attendance and graduation rates. But then I drilled into the system, and each one of those categories was given a numerical score. The system did not explain where those people got that numerical score from. Mm-hmm. If you changed the numbers, you could put New Mexico on top. You could make New Mexico number 35 or 16 or 18 or number 2 or whatever. So at a national level, there needs to be some serious discussions on what we expect our school systems to do, our state and local districts, and then how we're going to objectively and fairly score them so that we don't have these huge knee-jerk messes and embarrassments. And I would like to get in there and grapple with this whole big education mess. That's near and dear to my heart.
Right. Well, I'm so glad that it is, because again, that's such an important topic for so many people across our state. equally important, especially when we're talking about people down there in the South, are our public lands, because as you know, we're battling the idea of public lands with our opponents, with the Republican Party. And so I would like to talk to you for a few minutes here about what you feel we need to be doing with public lands as we move forward in the next 4 to 8 years with a new governor.
Well, as a wounded warrior, I have been able to meet with Mr. Zinke, who is the cabinet administrator for our public lands, and I've been able to meet with him twice.
Great.
And so I've gotten some insights. I've been able to make some inputs. And the number one thing I told Mr. Zinke is, I said, sir, we need to keep our public lands in public hands. Because here's the deal. We have both state and federal lands here in New Mexico, millions of acres. All right. If we take the federal lands and we transfer them to the states out west here, that's primarily where the federal public lands are. They're under the BLM, the National Forest, the national parks. If we transfer those lands to the states will have no choice. And I studied economics in college. The states will have no choice but to sell some of that land. And they will sell it to rich corporations. They'll sell it to foreign investors. And the land then will be taken away from the American public. Why do I say this? I'll just give you one example. To thin this land, the average cost of thinning the forest on the land is about $1,500 an acre. We would not be able to afford in New Mexico thinning all of our federal public lands in our states. The firefighting, hundreds of millions of dollars is spent on firefighting. We are able to take aircraft, old Navy planes and others, and load them up with fire retardants and go over to mountain ranges and valleys, and in a very precise way drop those items to stop fires from taking over communities and towns and burning up huge areas. Well, the state of New Mexico couldn't afford those aircraft. The state of New Mexico couldn't afford all those flight crews and the fuel. So we would have no choice but to sell the lands. And then what lands would be sold? Well, it would be the top choice lands first, the lands with water, the lands that might be suitable for grazing, the lands that are most beautiful. And then the people would be left with the scrub lands, and we would still have to pay for fighting fires and maintenance of those lands. So selling the federal public lands off would be the conclusion of transferring the state lands or the federal lands to the states. The states wouldn't be able to afford it. Right. These lands are our lands. They belong to the American people, and they need to stay that way. But I think that there are a lot of, and I listen to them, I'm not naive. There are a lot of people who would like to get these federal lands and then transfer them to the states so they could sell them. And a lot of real estate agents and speculators would make a lot of money. And the people with a lot of cash, these big corporations from the recent Trump cash, the tax reductions, they would be standing in line to buy it, and the American public would be squeezed out.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Now, one thing that I'm curious to know your thoughts on, recently in the last week, Steve Pierce made some headlines when he started talking about this idea that he's on the bandwagon of returning the Spanish and Mexican land grant lands that are public lands back to the public, back to whoever these land grant owners were. And it seems to me that on the one hand, this sounds like a really, oh yes, we want to see those lands returned. But on the other hand, what do you think? Do you think this is more like another Republican way of taking public lands and putting it into private hands so then they can sell it and mine it? What do you think? Have you given that any thought?
Transaction side of it is nothing less than a cockamamie scheme. Because just think about it, these Spanish land grants hundreds of years ago, all right? Mm-hmm. who was living there then, and where are their descendants now? And how would you figure out who the descendants are of these lands, and then how would you divvy up those lands? So he's talking about creating a nightmare scenario in terms of a transaction of actually, deeding these lands to human beings. Right. I think that what he's up to is that if he can establish a precedent of being able to seize public lands for any reason at all, and then transfer them or privatize them, then he's setting up a precedent for doing that with other lands. I don't like Mr. Pierce. I don't trust him. I think that he would exploit the lands for the benefit of the few, and the American public would be locked out. And I have a personal interest in this too. Moons ago, before I was born, one of my relatives cut some wood for a fellow in Illinois. In exchange for cutting this wood and giving the guy the wood, this is back in the 1800s, he was deeded a sliver of land. Mm. And that deed sat in a courthouse, not paid attention to, for nearly 100 years. And then somebody who resided on that property decided to have a survey done because that person was wanting to sell the land, and they discovered this. So the legal process was engaged, and all of a sudden I had cousins and distant cousins whom I'd never heard of, and we all owned together this small sliver of land, and it was about a half an acre. So it wasn't a huge amount of land, and it was out in the country of Illinois. So it wasn't like downtown Chicago, prime real estate or anything like that. So lawyers got, to us, and, and I said, listen, I don't want to take advantage of this poor fellow that owns the land and try to, have him pay millions of dollars out to satisfy all these people whom I don't even know. So therefore, I'm just going to relinquish any responsibility or right I have to any of this property. That's what I did. But the people who stayed in that, created a nightmare. Some people didn't want anything to do with it. Some people wanted a fair share of their fair share. And some people wanted, I need a lot of money. You'd create the same kind of scenario up there. And I own some land near the Monsanto Mountains, near the land grants. Who lives up there, and what happened to the generations 100 years ago, and where all the cousins and aunts and marriages and divorce and deaths and kids? It's a cockamamie scheme on the part of Mr. Pierce.
Yeah, I think that, when I was looking at it at first glance, it's meant in a way to try to attract people who are Democrats to say, yes, we want to do this. But on the other hand, you start thinking about it and you think, like my property that I own here in Socorro is a 2-acre plot of land. But, when I bought it, the title company had to go back hundreds and hundreds of years because we bought it from the land grant family. But there are so many other people that once we start doing this, where are we going to end up? Because it's not just going to be public lands that could then be affected, but people will be suing. A lot of it could just, the can of worms that could be opened is pretty wild. And so I can see what you're talking about in that, and I understand. I really, think that you did a really great thing in saying you needed to step out of that piece of property that people were challenging this landowner on. I'm looking at some of your information. I think that since you were on this budget and finance team, why don't we talk about budget and infrastructure and what you think that you can do and bring to the table in this area?
Okay, as an Air Force chaplain, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the Air Force, just speaking on me, what I did was we were tasked a number of years ago, and I was in personnel and budgets. That's the one, and readiness, one tour of the headquarters. I spent most of my life and career out in the trenches at combat bases or forward hospitals or that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But we were tasked to downsize the amount of personnel we had in our Air Force chaplain service. So I then looked at each base, their missions and how they could accomplish their missions of serving the people with the existing chaplains they had, and then what cuts they could make. I was able to save the American taxpayers, and I'm not bragging, but it is a fact, tens of millions of tax dollars. We did that in several ways. One, we cut active duty personnel without firing anybody or retiring anybody early, but through attrition. We cut the numbers of active duty personnel, and we assigned some of the duties that we had, unit visitation and so forth, to guard and reserve units that came in to help us out, on weekends, several times a month. The third thing that we did is we looked at efficiencies. And at one of the bases, we had a chaplain stationed in each unit. Well, that was great. But when we cut the chaplains, we didn't have enough chaplains for all the units. So I went to one of the young chaplains and I said, what could we do to serve our people, but yet deal with the loss of about half of our staff? Oh, he said, that's easy. And I said, what's easy? And he said, just give us all cell phones with unlimited text messages capabilities. And he said, it'll cost a few $100s a month. And I said, really? I said, what would you do with those? And he said, well, if we had somebody in, let's say, the maintenance unit who needed some counseling, and our chaplains were over in a meeting at the flying unit, we could just press the button and one of the chaplains would come over from the flying unit to the maintenance unit. And we would be able to systematically cover the entire base everywhere, by enhanced communication systems. And so and it worked. So my point in the state budget, we should look at every single agency that we have and seek efficiencies. Maybe there are two jobs that we can make into one. Maybe we can use computer technology to communicate better. Maybe there are a whole bunch of jobs that we are doing that we really don't need to do. And if that's the case, we need to eliminate those jobs. Now, I don't want anybody to be fired or get their pink slips over this, but it has to be a plan that's done over time as people retire. I'm convinced we can find all kinds of efficiencies. I read through the PED website, Public Education Department website, and I looked at what are all those people doing? And then in the military, we have something called the tooth to tail ratio, where we do budgets based on tooth to tail. The tooth is the combat edge, and the tail is the support edge. If you have too much in the combat edge and not enough in the support edge, you're not going to be able to sustain combat operations. If you have too much in the support end and not enough in the lethal end, you're not going to be able to, do the business either. And an example is here in our own District 51 school system area. I believe that we have way too much money invested in administration and infrastructure and administrator offices and all of that kind of thing, too much in the tail end and not enough tooth end. And the cutting edge, of education would be classroom teachers actually shaping the students and serving the students and shaping the future. I'm also convinced that we spend way too much money on tests. Those companies that are doing all this testing are making a lot of money off of this. I believe also that I'm sniffing some cronyism. I would like to see us do a complete study on how we spend every nickel in our school district in District 51. And then what is it that we can do to better pay our teachers and provide classroom education rather than this huge infrastructure that we don't need all of. So it's going to take courage and guts. It's going to take confrontation. It's going to take a willingness on the part of people to change. And some of them are not going to want to change. But if we want an efficient school system, we're going to have to make some changes in the way we do budget.
Yeah. That really makes a lot of sense. I think that you've spent a lot of time looking at this, and these things, like, it does make a lot of sense. We're getting close to the end now, so we have a few more things to talk about. I want to address our viewers to be among the first to see our new interviews or new programs. Be sure to follow MAD on Facebook or on Twitter. That's Get Mad, and subscribe to my YouTube and Patreon channels for exclusive content. And then let's go ahead and continue, and let's talk to the veterans out there. And Jeff, you're a veteran yourself. I'm a veteran. It's really important to me, and I know to you too, that veterans aren't forgotten, and that even our active duty, we do spend a lot of money on the military, but we don't spend a lot of money on the active duty personnel themselves, and then not on the veteran side. So can you speak to our veterans and active duty out there and who are going to be veterans, and just speak to them and tell them where you stand and how you're going to serve them in the future?
Well, there's really one thing that stands between us and tyranny, and that is whatever the warriors are wearing at the time, because they put themselves, in harm's way to defend us. Not all of them, go into lethal combat, but many are in the support roles. They're exposed to chemicals, they're exposed to noises. Their families are challenged by the deployments. I mean, it's just a myriad of ways that veterans are physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally impacted by military service. And when they're done with military service, then I believe we have a special moral obligation to take care of them. I personally have been a patient at 6 different Veterans Administration hospitals. I am a wounded warrior. I have been also a patient at 3 different clinics. And I struggle with a number of issues, from Agent Orange to the burn pits in Iraq and all those effects on me, and trauma to my body, trauma to my brain and spirit too. Mm-hmm. So I'm a typical veteran. I'm like everybody else, and they're near and dear to me. With regard to the Veteran Administration, we need to be there with open arms. And I say be there. We need to be engaged in the communities in these clinics. We need to have a top-notch VA hospital in Albuquerque, and also access to the one in El Paso. And there are some skills that are in El Paso, like I believe dermatology is better in El Paso than Albuquerque, and El Paso is a lot closer, but we got a state line there, so we're fussing back and forth to the Veterans Administration, like who authorizes us to go to El Paso or Albuquerque. So I will continue to engage those battles on behalf of veterans, so that they're going to have some choices of which hospitals to go to, and be able to get transportation compensation. Great. And all that. And also something very personal too for the veterans. Not all of the veterans are articulate. I was a hospital chaplain in trauma hospitals, so I know how to speak up, and I know how to, frankly, fuss or complain or say, look, here's an issue here and I need some help with this. I'm a veteran. Well, not all the veterans know how to do that. So I would like to be somebody that they can come to in District 51. And if they have an issue, I can take that forward for them on their behalf to one of our service organizations, the Disabled American Veterans, the VFW, or one of the others, or straight to the VA system. And if there's a snag, I would like to get in there and grapple with it and try to intercede on behalf of the veterans. I also think that we need competent veterans care, people who know how to deal with us regarding PTSD or the other medical issues that we have. And the VA is quite, let me say this, liberal about handing out medicines. Okay, well, that's fine. But once you take 2 or 3 different medicines, I mean, now you've got a a scenario brewing inside of your body, and it takes really smart doctors to understand, the effects of this, what we call a cocktail of different medicines and how they might interact with each other. Blood pressure medicines, or medicines to treat, anxiety from PTSD or arthritis, or whatever else is going on in the veteran's body. I also am very concerned here too. We had a wonderful state veterans office here in Alamogordo, and our coordinator, after decades of just wonderful service, retired. So the response of the state and the Martinez administration was to just shut down access here in Alamogordo. I mean, that was absurd.
Right.
So I'm going to work to keep this veterans office open. I'm going to work with the other legislators and everybody else I can think of to make sure these state offices remain open in our communities, because they're places for widows to go and family members and veterans, and you get some tax deduction. You can get license plates, but it's a place for veterans to go and talk to. Some folks who really understand what it's like to be, a veteran in military service. So, and if we don't take care of our people, how in the world can we expect veterans or young people in the future to say, hey, I'll sign up and I'll go in harm's way and I'll take a chance on getting shot or exposed to chemicals or burn pits or something, and I'll take all those chances and believe that the country is going to take care of them. So it's ridiculous not to take care of the veterans. We don't need to coddle them, but by George, we better be taking care of them. So I'm pretty passionate about that, Madeline.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, that was, as you know, that was a big, push for me when I was running, and that is something that attracts me to your candidacy as well. That I feel real strong about and feel good about for you. I
was a Marine, and I was in Air Force chaplain service, but I got a chance to go on 2 Coast Guard cutters, the Diligence and the Reliance. All right. Mm-hmm. Now, I went deep into those ships, into the engine rooms and so forth. There are smells in there. There are oils. There are paint. There are chemicals. I mean, it is not totally a healthy environment for people.
Right.
And the machine guns, the M2 machine guns with the, Coast Guard still uses, boom, boom, boom. I mean, what does that do? The sound, the concussion of our ears. And I mean, even, in the Coast Guard or whatever service we're in, I mean, we get exposed to all kinds of effects on our bodies and minds and souls. So thank you for your service too.
Oh, thank you. And I thank you for your service. And we're right there at the end. I want to have you speak directly to your constituents. Anything that I didn't ask, that I didn't touch on, that you just want to speak directly to them, and also give them your contact information so that they can get to you and to donate to you, because that's important.
Okay, they can go to elect Jeff Swanson on Act Blue. They want to make a donation. They can donate to my address with a check, 146 San Pedro Drive in Alamogordo, New Mexico. They can call me on the phone and fuss and complain or give me advice and counsel. My phone number is 505-850-3339. They can write me an email, electjeffswanson@gmail.com. As I go out and knock on the doors and listen to the people, what they're telling me is that they are sick and tired of politics in District 51 being gladiator sports. They want Republicans and Democrats to cooperate and get along. And I've told them this: if I win as a Democrat, the Republicans are not going to lose, because I'm going to represent these precious people too. And I'm going to represent some of their best values, like fiscal accountability and behaving myself as a transparent government official. And the people are telling me they want politicians to work for the people rather than politicians working for themselves. They also are very concerned about infrastructure here, like flood control, and they know that we do not have the tax base to pay for all of this. So they're looking for somebody who can work with the state and federal resources to find Army Corps of Engineer avenues and others that can address the local, real problems here with flood control and other issues. They want somebody to get in there and fix education, and that's near and dear at the top of my list. So I think I'm the ideal candidate. And people give me a shot. Here I am, and I'm ready to go. And I'm not interested in getting big endorsements from ALEC and all these big organizations. I'll tell you what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the citizens that live in the middle of New Mexico, State District 51. They can't afford shingles on their roofs, or have flood waters running down the street, right outside their front door. I'm interested in impressing those people by going to work for them. So I don't want any money. I'm not in this for money. I retired. I'm semi-retired. I have the time to do this. I'd like to be on 4 committees for the people of this district and represent them. You want a working candidate, somebody who rides mules and raises cattle and has some education and retired military and finger on the pulse and lives here too. I'm your guy.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. And on behalf of myself and everyone in your district, thank you for running, and thank you for sharing so much with us here today.
And thank you for all your leadership and goodness too, Madeline. When we had the state fair during the previous election, here you came with your family, and it was so nice to meet your husband and son, and you hung out with the people of Alamogordo here, Otero County, for hours and hours and hours and hours. And we had a lot of fun, and it's a pleasure and an honor to know you too.
Okay. Thank you so